Hello, this is Bridget Flynn. I am the co-founder of Midwest Artist Project Services, or MAPS, and I am taking over from Meredith at this point to talk about some of the submission components for the InSITE2020 application. I encourage you to visit our website, midwestarts.org, to learn a little bit more about who we are, what we do, our fiscal sponsorship program, and the consultations and application reviews that we offer. So getting back to the InSITE2020 application, as Meredith probably explained, we are focused today just on phase one of the application, which is really where you as the artist are going to be proposing your idea, your concept for what you'll be proposing for installation in downtown St. Louis. The components are the artist statement, a statement that summarizes your idea and how it relates to the goals of InSITE and the Downtown STL Public Art Initiative, the description of a specific site or the type of site where you would envision your project, a description of the media that you would use, the approximate duration that you would think the work would be on display, and the approximate budget range that you estimate would be necessary, a little statement about your connection to St. Louis, and then we'll talk about the different attachments. And while this looks like a lot, I would encourage you to think about those middle four components of the application as really kind of one big section. These parts should all speak to each other. They should really support each other and be all of a whole. So you might consider when you're sitting down to do your draft, think about how you will space out where you're going to talk about the different components of what you're proposing and see where they fit best. So you're maximizing your time, the space that you have on the very limited word count for the application. Some tips to consider in your application: make sure you have a clear sense of vision, that you're communicating your artistic signature for who you are as an artist. Think about work that is contributing to contemporary public art on a national level and that could speak to both St. Louis natives and people who might be visiting from other parts of the world, as well as other parts of the country. Work that speaks to that shows an intellectual approach, and that there's some things going on there that a viewer might unpack as they were looking at your work. And then just the overall professionalism of your application. You want to make sure you have clear writing, high quality work samples, and of course follow the directions and submit on time. So what is an artist statement? Some of you may already have artist statements, but it's always worth taking a moment to look back and see if it could be updated if you already have one. And if you're starting from scratch, we'll talk about some things to include. So your artist statement is a brief description of your work that provides the reader with information about your sources, ideas, process, inspiration. It's generally 2 to 3 paragraphs. You may have different versions of your artist statement that you use for different purposes. This is a rather short artist statement, only 300 words. Some artist statements could be as long as 1,000 words, but that's probably better suited for a website or a special exhibition opening. For this opportunity, you'll want a short, consolidated version. Your artist statement should inform the viewer about the work, but it doesn't need to explain your work, and it doesn't need to replicate the work. So you don't need your artist statement to give a very literal description of your work, and also it doesn't need to restate exactly what it's all about, but it's going to give the viewer kind of some inside information to help them appreciate the work a little bit more. You also may consider updating your artist statement every time you complete a new body of work, especially if it's very different from what you've been doing in the past. So some questions to consider as you think about your ideas. How will your idea, if executed, impact how we see downtown? Who is the audience? What will their experience be? What is the problem to be explored or pursued? And since this is concept only, there should be a really strong concept at the core. Some questions to start the writing process. So getting back to artist statements. Some questions that you might use to start as prompts to help you start to write your artist statement or to refresh it would be: what might viewers want to know about your work that they can't get just from looking? Where does your inspiration come from? If there's something in your identity or background that a viewer might not know just by looking at your work, but is going to inform how they see the work, you should definitely include that. What about your process, either creative or constructive, might your viewer find interesting? So, if there is a skill that you learned in a unique way, or if your creative process involves something that is kind of different or unique, that is definitely something that people enjoy hearing about, and also really can help them appreciate your work. What might be meaningful about the materials that you work with? So, if you work with bird feathers, or you work with marble, or you work with paint, is there something meaningful about that that really informs how someone might appreciate your work? And then finally, where does the current body of work fit in with your overall development as an artist? So sort of where are you in your journey? Some more tips. An effective statement really welcomes people to your art. You don't have to have a PhD in order to appreciate what they're looking at. Make I statements rather than you statements. So try and avoid phrases like, you typically feel, et cetera, et cetera. You should be talking about yourself and not what the viewer is experiencing. Use active words whenever possible. Get out the thesaurus and find some great verbs to really help make your artist statement come alive. And if you're still having trouble getting started, schedule a studio visit. Invite someone who, whether they do or don't know your work very well, to come and listen to the types of questions that they ask, or listen to what they don't ask about. And that can help inform where you might begin writing your artist statement. But at the end of the day, you want to give too little and not too much. And so be ruthless in your editing and really leave the viewer, leave the person reading your artist statement wanting to know a little bit more about your work. I think a great sample artist statement is by the artist Swoon. I will let you pause the video and read that here, but I think this is a great example where she talks about her materials, where she is in her development as an artist, what she's passionate about, and talking about her community work, which might not be something that you necessarily would get just by looking at, for example, the work below. So moving on to the statement of your idea, and the other supporting elements of that. So for your 500-word statement, consider starting with a very catchy and concise description as your first sentence. If you had to really condense everything about your idea into one sentence, what would that be? If awarded this opportunity, I will, and it will. Period. That is really going to help your application stand out in the pile. Think about how many applications the reviewers are going to have to get through. You really want them to remember yours. What will the viewer experience be like? Can you write what it's going to be like for different types of viewers to encounter your work, to experience your work, to come across it, maybe different types of day, people who are there for different reasons. Think about that and really try and put yourself, and then of course the application reviewer who's reading your statement, really try and put yourself in the mindset of that viewer. How is the project specific to the goals of InSITE 2020? So this is encouraging exploration, curiosity, a new way of seeing downtown. So how specifically will what you're proposing address those goals? How does it contribute to the global and national conversation in public art? Take a look at I think at the end of this presentation, there's some other resources you might check out of what's happening in public art around the country, what are some landmark pieces of public art, and this initiative is really to put St. Louis on the level with those global public art initiatives. So how does your work contribute to that? At this time, though, focus more on selling your vision than giving a detailed explanation. So use your word count wisely and really get the reviewers excited to learn more about your idea, which you would explain in the second phase of the application if you're selected. For the question asking about the description of a specific site or attributes of a site for your project, again, this is why you set up such a strong concept in your original big idea statement, is because then as you talk about your preferred site, it should support that. It should support the ideas that you've already put forward. Who are the people who interact with the space currently and who doesn't interact with it? And is there anything meaningful or significant to the site's location or history that might be meaningful for you to mention? Include a description of the media that you would likely use to realize your project. Again, the media that you choose should support the big ideas that you've already put forward. However, at this point, this is just for the committee to better understand the scale and the scope of the projects proposed. And keep in mind that maximum budget of $30,000, especially when you're including installation, de-installation costs, any kind of maintenance fees for the life of the project. Those can add up really quickly. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about materials. It's not just up to $30,000 only for materials. So it's what portion of that would you be budgeting? And then the approximate duration that you would like the work to be on display. Really think about the durability of what you're proposing, any maintenance needs, and the human resources. If this is something that involves performance or something that involves something to happen like every day, really take into account the time, if you're going to be managing volunteers, anything that would relate to other costs, whether they're time costs or financial costs that would build up as part of that duration. The application then asks for a brief description of you or your team's connection to St. Louis. This is not only confirming the fulfillment of the eligibility requirement, but the connections can be that you've lived here or stayed here for any portion of your life, if you attended school here, if you had some kind of meaningful experience, but resist the urge to write a love poem to St. Louis and do not write your entire autobiography here. This is really just a very brief summary of what your connection to St. Louis is. The required attachments are a CV or resume, your three professional references, and then your work samples and descriptions. So we're going to talk about each of those three very quickly. Your artist CV or resume, it does not have to be long. Sometimes people get intimidated by seeing that as part of an application. It doesn't matter if you only have 2 or 3 things on your CV. It's really not the basis of your getting this or any other award. It is providing context for where you are in your art career, and that is it. It really is not going to determine whether you are in the running or not. It should not be too long. So no more than 3 pages. So if you do happen to have an extensive CV, do try and consolidate that to have only the most recent or relevant experience listed. And your artist CV or your artist resume should only include your art career information. So it's not a resume that you would use for applying for a job. It is only about your career as an artist. You can find sample templates on the College Art Association website, so I really encourage you to check that out. If you haven't updated your CV in a while, you might want to make sure you're still following the best professional standards. For your professional references, these should be people who can speak to your activity and professionalism in regards to your artistic practice. So this may be a curator, a gallerist, a past professor that you've worked with, if you have had a commission in the past, but someone who can speak to the fact that you've got high quality of work, that you have good project management skills, that you respond to emails and phone calls in a timely way, that you have good communication skills if you were speaking in front of a group of people or need to work with other groups. For the artists selected as finalists, all your references will be contacted. So choose your references carefully and make sure that they could speak with specifics about the skills that we mentioned above. And also let your references know that you are using them as references. That is definitely a pitfall you don't want to have happen to you, is if someone gets a phone call and they have no idea that you've put their name down somewhere. So just take a moment to shoot them an email or give them a phone call and say, hey, can I use you as a reference? And then if you do not have strong art world references, do submit references who can vouch for your professionalism in some way. So again, someone who can speak to your responsiveness and to your project management skills. For your work samples and descriptions, you're going to upload 10 samples of previous works. The submissions can include a mix of JPEG images, audio clips, and videos. And the videos are 60-second clips. And that is one whole work sample, is a 60-second clip. Teams of multiple artists may submit up to a maximum of 15 samples. And those should represent the team working collectively, or if they are separate work samples for different individual members of a team, you should in the description explain why it is relevant for this project, for the team to be working together, if what is being uploaded is from individuals that from a time when they weren't working as a team. Very thoughtfully curate your work samples for this opportunity. Really think about what's going to make the best impression and that clarity of vision of that artistic signature for you as an artist. Go for depth over breadth. So select works that show your best talents in one area, and whether that's in a single medium, a single field, a single subject, that's okay, but try and go for some consistency between your images so that, you know, if a stranger was looking at them, which they will be, they can tell it's all by one person. And select works that are no more than 5 years old if possible. It can be really tempting to include that one piece that you did 20 years ago that's just still so awesome, but if it's not relevant to your practice now, let it go. The quality of your work samples is of the utmost importance. You really don't want your application to be passed over because you didn't have high resolution images. If you don't have good images of your work, you know, borrow a camera, hire a photographer, and after you get the photos, check the color and the black-white contrast on a screen. It can look incredibly different from monitor to monitor. It can look very different when printed out. It's going to look different on the little, you know, back of the camera. So really check and make sure that your work's being represented accurately. No composite images. So resist the urge to, you know, insert a tile or a mosaic. Only one image per work sample. And a detail image counts as one work sample. So you only get 10 slots, one image per slot. Multiple images of the same project, however, are encouraged and expected for previous public artworks. So if you've done previous work, especially 3D work, it's going to be good practice for you to choose more than one image so you can show people interacting with the piece or the piece from different sides, different angles. For installations, performances, or interactive works, you'll want to make sure your work sample image captures the depth of field needed to understand the work. You may need to use more than one work sample to show those different angles or detail. Definitely, if it's interactive, include an image of your participation. You don't want to have to ask people to use their imaginations. And then for performances in the description caption, you definitely want to explain the moment that we're seeing, that we're seeing the image. For each uploaded work sample, you do have an opportunity to submit a description, and you should include the items below, the title, just a quick description. It says 100 words max. I would make that less if you can. The media, the date, and especially if it's still installed somewhere, the dimensions, location, and the total budget. The applicants must state their role in the creation of the artwork if other professionals were involved in the creation. So if you were just a partner in creating it, definitely explain that. And then if it was commissioned by another agency, definitely put that in there. This is a screenshot of what the work sample upload section will look like. So when you're in Cafe, you know, this is what you will see. So you can see you have to fill out most of these sections. And if you are curious what is happening in public art, getting back to that point about how is what you're proposing contributing to that conversation, there are a couple of publications out there, Sculpture Magazine and the Public Art Review, that you should definitely check out. Not that your work has to imitate or be anything like what's already out there. It certainly can be totally new, but in thinking about how is your application going to be competitive, I think it is, you do well to know what else is going on, especially in other cities outside of St. Louis, because the reviewers certainly do. So you want to know that you're contributing to that conversation and making the case for yourself. And then some national organizations have some amazing resources. The Americans for the Arts Public Art Network, and especially that Year in Review database, is something you can spend a lot of time on. It is a huge database where you can see a lot of thumbnails, and then you click on them to get bigger images of public art around the country that has been sort of noted for its quality and its excellence. And it's really fun. It's really cool to see what's going on in other cities. So I encourage you to take some time to explore that as you're developing your ideas. And then the forecast for public art as well. One last tip, update your website. So even if you're not selected for this opportunity, the individual committee members may be interested in your work for other purposes. So they are going to look up your website. So make sure that you have everything updated the way that you would like it, and that your social media pages show your recent upcoming work, if you have any upcoming events or exhibitions, and especially if you have email or contact form, make sure it is easy for them to get in touch with you. That is one of the most important things an artist can do. So make sure that even though the application itself does not specifically call for your website, information or anything about it, make sure that you do have that updated, because if they're interested in your work, they will look you up. Artists may submit questions by 4 p.m. CST on May 9th to Angie Villa, and responses to those questions will be posted on the InSITE website by 4 o'clock on May 13th. So you may want to check back around May 13th or afterwards to see if there's anything maybe that you were wondering about that's already been answered, or maybe something you haven't thought about that someone else asked that's going to help you have a better application. We wish you good luck, and please submit those questions if you have them to Angie. And please reach out to the Regional Arts Commission if you have any other questions. Thanks.